Picture this. You're walking along the Seine, looking out at the boats docked at the harbor. The sun is setting and its rays reflect across the water. There is live music playing, people walking about and chatting, and the smell of freshly cooked food wafting over from the outdoor restaurant behind you. You then turn to see a structure, reminiscent of both a boat and a church, at the very edge of the water. You're looking at the Church of St. Catherine in Honfleur. In this presentation, I will be delving into the history of the town of Honfleur in Normandy, France, and giving some more information on this unique and beautiful structure. Although we don't get to see it in person, hopefully after hearing about its history we will have a new appreciation for it. According to its travel website and the many pictures I looked at, Honfleur looks like an absolutely breathtaking place, full of many little shops and quaint cafes with quite the view. It is home to a mere 7,454 people, but is a popular site for the roughly 1 million tourists that flock to Normandy yearly. Honfleur is also considered the birthplace of Impressionism, and it remains a hotspot for many artists today, such as many other places in Normandy as well. In the Rick Steves video we watched previously, you can see the people setting up their easels and painting scenes of the coastline, the docked boats, and the buildings along the water. Looking at it today with its picturesque views and inviting lively atmosphere, it's hard to picture it as anything else. However, back in the day, it was built almost entirely for buying large trade items, and had a large wall and 2 gates fortifying it from the outside world. It was a coveted spot among different rulers since the harbor of Honfleur is in a perfect location for trade, with it being on the southern side of the mouth of the Seine, which connects with the English Channel. Back during the 100 Years' War, the French king had this very strategic spot protected against attack, but the English still managed to take over for a few decades. During this war, the Church of St. Catherine was partially destroyed, but it was later rebuilt, which I will be discussing within this presentation. The head of the port in Honfleur is called the Vieux Bassin, which is where lots of different shops fight for space due to its prime views, and many different restaurants stretch their terraces across the cobblestones. Each side of the bassin has a completely different feel to it, with the eastern side being more packed with an array of different buildings, and the western area sloping up to the splendid wooden Church of St. Catherine, and a district where you will find the town's main museums dedicated to the arts. Honfleur's southern area is a bit more tucked away, but is said to be well worth exploring for its architecture, including different churches and restored fountains. As you look over the Church of St. Catherine, you will notice a beautiful structure made entirely of wood. It was not always this way, with the older version of it being a stone church which was destroyed in the 100 Years' War, like I previously mentioned. Medieval timber churches have been known to be built all across Europe, but according to Walter Horn, author of On the Origins of the Medieval Bay System, St. Catherine's Church is the oldest surviving building of its kind in France. In England, this type of church dates back to the 14th century, and in Belgium, they date back to even the 6th and 7th century. St. Catherine's Church is still very old itself, which dates back to the 15th century. It is unknown how many timber churches exist across Europe, because many of them were not properly documented. So it seems that this type of church has often been overlooked throughout history, due to its quaint and simple nature. Horn goes on to say that although these churches are often forgotten about, St. Catherine's Church is also one of the most historically revealing churches out of the different known timber structures. This is because of its unique transformation through the English invasion and the 100 Years' War. In 1946, an architect named Monsieur Julien discovered that the original form of the church was a three-aisled structure, which Horn further researched and also backs up. After rebuilding the new church, they took down one of the aisles and instead added a second nave, which is how it gets its unique boat-like shape that is well known today. As you can see here. Here is the first nave, and over here, if you see the pews going along down this aisle, the second nave is over here, creating a hull-like shape that is boat-like. The church today consists of two parallel naves of equal height and two aisles. The first nave is the oldest part of the building, which dates back to the second half of the 15th century. In the 16th century, there was a second nave added, and its vault reflected more of the wooden vaults of modest Gothic churches, showing that this church pulls on different stylistic influences. I want to stress that the builders of this church were not your typical cathedral or church architects, but that they were the axe masters and boat builders of the city's naval yards. It was built by these members of the town after the English occupants left, and with extremely limited resources. In fact, resources were so sparse that they used wood from the nearby Toke Forest as the main raw material, and they applied their self-taught boat construction skills to put the church together once again. It was built using naval construction techniques, which gives the impression of an upside-down ship's hull. According to Rick Steves, if you flipped it, it would float. These naval constructors created St. Catherine's Church without using any saws, just like their Norman ancestors and the Vikings before them. There's also a bell tower separate from the rest of the building, which is very unique to this church. Today, people find this simply beautiful church to be packed with character due to its unique structure and remarkable decorative details. It was listed as a historic monument in 1879, and it is the largest church in France to be entirely made of wood and with a separate bell tower. It is dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, with a wooden sculpture showing her holding a wheel and sword depicted in the church. According to my research, during the medieval time period, St. Catherine was one of the most famous saints of the church, and she was a popular subject in Renaissance art. She is holding a wheel because she had been ordered to be executed on a breaking wheel, which was an ancient form of torture. This was considered one of the most painful punishments and was reserved for the worst criminals, as it involved having a person's limbs stretched among the spokes of the wheel, and then their bones would be shattered by an executioner with a heavy rod. Apparently, when Catherine was about to be executed, she touched the wheel and it instantly broke, through the power of a miracle. She was then beheaded after this with a sword, which is why she carries a sword in her other hand. Overall, I found the structure to be such a contrast to the more elaborate and ornate cathedrals we have seen and studied throughout the beginning of the class. When I saw this Church of St. Catherine, I was immediately struck by its simplicity and calming environment, and wanted to learn more about its origin. After researching it, I was surprised to find that there is a lot less history on this church and churches like it than I was expecting. I was hoping to learn more, but I was still so thankful for what I did find. This made me wonder why there is not as much history or information on the site compared to many other well-known and well-documented sites in Normandy. I decided that it is most likely due to the fact that the church was rebuilt after the English occupation without anyone commissioning it, and that it was built by simple townspeople. There were not a ton of documents kept on it, since this is not a grand cathedral or abbey that was worked on in a bustling city for centuries on end. Rather, it was a timber church in a small harbor town. Earlier on, it was also mentioned that many of these timber churches were not well documented or completely not documented at all. So this church definitely goes along with that theme. However, I still found very interesting information and immensely enjoyed learning about the town of Honfleur, the history of the architecture of St. Catherine's Church, and a brief history on St. Catherine herself. I am so glad to have gained knowledge about the topic on European medieval timber churches as well, which I had not known about before. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation as well. Thank you.